Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dhalsim series. We are up to gold. It's going to be less content in gold, but particularly the first thing we cover is going to be harder to work on, and the very last thing we cover involves every character in the game, so that's going to take you a while to figure out. Alright, so let's get into it. The first thing we want to talk about is the float. Now I could have put float into silver and put all the drive rush stuff into gold, but I think the reason why float is actually the more advanced skill is because you mostly have to react to what your opponent does when you float, and that takes much longer to get the hang of and is something that you probably want to be doing from gold onwards, whereas the drive rush stuff is really about Dhalsim playing his game. And one thing I didn't mention about drive rush last time, we were using it after anti-airs particularly to do this, but the other reason why you should be drive rushing occasionally with Dhalsim is just to recover space and not get your opponent into a headspace where they think they're just always approaching you. In the same way that Guile throws booms, 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 and then suddenly drive rushes into you and does bazooka knee, Dhalsim should also be throwing limbs and then occasionally just drive rushing in, recovering space and putting your opponent on the back foot and just giving them more things to think about. That's also the case with float. So if you're always putting limbs out, this kind of thing, then occasionally you also want to yoga float and give them something else to think about. All right, now I've already demonstrated one thing that makes yoga float difficult, which is that it's a very high execution move, and I think this is part of why Dhalsim is a hard character according to the game itself. So to do float, you can press down and 2 kicks. The problem with the down and 2 kicks is what I just showed you, which is that it goes a little bit too high. If you press medium punch when you do the auto float like that, your medium punch will go over their head, and that's not what you want. Whereas if you just jump and immediately press down and 2 kicks, then you'll actually stop jumping and start floating much closer to the ground, and then you can do this move. And that's actually what you want to practice. So it's not down and 2 kicks. I think you never use that actually. You always use jump, down and 2 kicks, which is a lot of buttons to be pressing in a very short space of time. And sometimes you actually want to go higher than that. For example, when you're playing against Terry, who uses burn knuckle a lot, and we'll discuss that in a moment. But before we do that, let's talk about the reasons to float. So after you've learnt how to instant float, and you can practice instant floating by jump, float, and then just press light kick, and you'll fall down really quickly. And that's actually something that you do want to get into the habit of. Sometimes you just want to sort of fake that you're floating by doing that. So once you've got the hang of it, then let's talk about why you would use it. So one of the main reasons to use it is that you move faster when you're floating than when you're walking. So Dhalsim's walk speed is incredibly slow. It's the slowest walk speed in the game. Excruciating. Whereas float is a lot faster. So if you want to cover some ground, float's the way to do it. And if you see your opponent moving backwards, you can do a light drill to really gain a lot of space, right? Light drill moves very fast. I'm going to talk about how to use drill offensively in Diamond. It's the hardest part of Dhalsim's toolkit, and it's also the riskiest part of Dhalsim's toolkit, because if you float wrong, you're going to be like -8 and right in front of your opponent, and they're just going to pound you. So let's not worry about that, but the only thing that I will say is that you can light drill to get forward if your opponent's just ceding space. So we use float to cover distance. The next thing that we use float for is to set up another layer to our obstacle course. So we've got our limb obstacle course, we've got our fireball obstacle course, and then we also have our float obstacle course. And the float obstacle course is particularly effective against characters that are good at beating our fireballs. And there is a lot of those in this game. So Marisa's Superman punch goes through fireballs, Cammy's spin knuckle goes through fireballs. These kind of techniques really ruin Dhalsim's day when he's trying to set up a fireball obstacle course, and so you want to use the float obstacle course instead. Now there's 3 things that you really want to practice in the float obstacle course, maybe 4 even. So the first one is the one I've shown you already, the medium punch. It's got huge forward range, and it stops your opponent walking towards you, right? So if you just see your opponent walking towards you, just let them know that they can't do that. They've got to keep their distance. This is the float version of medium punch, and it is vulnerable to drive impact in the same way, so be a little bit careful with it, but you can mostly spam it out. The second thing you want to learn is heavy kick. This is my favorite thing in all of Dhalsim's arsenal. It does a lot of mental damage, I find. So you're floating, your opponent jumps on you and you just kick him. This initially might seem like a bad button to you because it goes on this very sharp upward angle, and so unless you're really close to your opponent, you won't actually kick them. And it has surprisingly bad frame advantage. Like you see that when I'm right in front of Terry, I still only get 7 frames of advantage, so I can't even do this, right? He blocks it. I have to go into medium kick, right? Which doesn't seem that great. But this thing has such incredible priority against people in the air. It just always beats it. If you see your opponent jump, just hit that heavy kick button. We're going to do a drill to practice this in a moment. But so we've got 3 heights. We've got straight in front of us, we've got straight up in the air, and if our opponent drive rushes at us, then we've got medium kick. And that's the only use for this button, I would say. This button sucks. I hate it. If I had to make a couple of changes to Dhalsim, number 1 would be making this 6 frames instead of 8, but probably number 2 would just be giving this a bit more range, right? It doesn't need to be heaps of range, but like if I'm jumping to the top of the screen here, I want it to reach Terry, right? That really frustrates me that doesn't reach Terry there, right? It should. Just give it another, like, I don't know, inch on the screen, on my screen. All right, anyway, but so you use that when people are drive rushing at you. So let's, there's one more thing to do, which is that if your opponent is not coming at you when you're floating, if they're just letting you float towards them, then we want to use the palms, right? And the palms is quite a good obstacle course, right? That's actually should be our default, is just slide forward and palms, right? If they're really far away from you, you can use that, but generally speaking, slide forward and palms, right? And then if you do manage to get a hit with the palms, then you might be able to combo into that. And you'll be surprised at how often you do get hits with palms because they go pretty far forward. People often run into you because they're used to you doing this, for example, or they think that you're gonna comet, but you very rarely do comet off float. You should do it occasionally. Dhalsim's all about that obstacle course, right? So you've got to constantly show people different sorts of randomness. But generally speaking, it's palms. If you see them drive rush, it's the foot. If you see them jump, it's the high foot, my favorite move. And if you just see them like wandering around standing, then you give them this one, right? All right, so let's do a little drill to practice that. And I think Terry's really good for this drill. So we have one recording where Terry's, burn knuckling, no. One recording down here where Terry's just walking around and finishing forward. One recording here where Terry's walking around and finishing backwards. Then we're gonna have one recording where Terry drive rushes and we want to practice giving him the boot. Oof, I was slow. Right, that's what we want to practice there. Right, you've got to be pretty quick with it. Sometimes the palms will also work, and that's why defaulting to palms is pretty good. Right, but that's really what we want to be doing there. So we've got one where he's walking around and drive rushing, and then one where he's walking around and doing that one. And that's actually what we want to react to with float. Oops. He's just going to drive rush and jump in. And we want to hit him with the palms. And then we can also have one where he jumps, right? Because we always want to be having our anti-airs on lock. And this is also an opportunity for us to practice the big float kick. Come on, Terry, jump at me. There it is, yeah. So satisfying, so much mental damage to your opponent where they're like, God, I hate this obstacle course so much. There it is. All right, I love that. All right, so now you just turn all of these on. And then we just practice that. Oops. But I would even turn off the fireball. So just have Terry walking around and occasionally he's going to drive rush at you. Right. That medium palm works quite well against drive rush as well. The reason why we don't use medium palms is because I've got Terry just to drive rush in there and do a heavy punch. But the other thing that a lot of players will do, especially Terry players, is that they will drive rush in and do a sweep. Oosh. And the nice thing about that, I guess, is that if you're high on the float, that sweep will miss you. But if you're low on the float, then it will hit. Generally, you don't want to float for too long. You just want to, oops, get up there, come forward, right? Heavy kick works quite well as a default as well, because it covers right in front of you, and it also covers the air approach. Try not to float backwards. Oops, I pressed the wrong button there. Right, and so you're just trying to react to what the opponent's doing. Oops. If you're close to the opponent, you don't want to do the jump medium kick because it's got bad frame advantage. Oops, didn't get my instant float off. Right, so just float and react to what your opponent does. Oops. Remember that you can also teleport, so occasionally you just want to do that, right? So the whole point of Dhalsim is to always keep your opponent guessing. Right? Sometimes you can OD comet and teleport. Love that interaction, right? You're just putting the palms out by default. Oh, see, that's what's going to get you into trouble, is if you palms a lot. Boom. Boom. Nice. Easy stuff. Easy stuff. Oh, yeah. Alright, I think that covers us for the float. You want to practice those things. The main things you're practicing are the medium punch, the heavy kick, palms by default, and occasionally you just get a nice fat combo out of that. Using it to get forward. Sometimes you want to drill to get forward. Sometimes you want to comet. Just get into practice mode doing that drill. Practice it a bit and then go into matches and just try messing about. You've got to do a lot of match play with Dhalsim because a lot of it's just getting a feel for the sort of the vibe of a situation and what you should change in your patterns during that vibe. One thing I'll say maybe is that if your fireball trap is just like really working, like if your opponent really doesn't know what to do against the limbs, then don't suddenly start floating, right? Floating is something to do once you've noticed that your opponent can in fact handle your basic patterns, right? But if they can't handle the basic patterns, then you just want to stick with the basic patterns, right? Because float is more complicated and it is actually kind of easier to approach on the float. Like if you've got good drive rush timings, good jump in timings, things like that, then the float is like less effective. But we just want to have this extra thing in our arsenal. Okay, the next thing we need to talk about is instant teleport. And for this, oh wait, I want to say one more thing about Terry. All right, where was that? Burn Knuckle. Right, so obviously Burn Knuckle, you can drive impact it. Right, but one thing that's worth noting about Burn Knuckle, because you do want to float quite a lot against Terry, is that you want to float a little bit higher than usual, right? There, because at that height, Terry won't be able to hit you with the Burn Knuckle. That's too high, just here, right? Now obviously here, you can't hit him with the medium palms because you're too high. But he also, see, if you're too low, he'll hit you with the Burn Knuckle. So we want to be a little bit higher on the float against Terry so that he can't hit us with that Burn Knuckle. Come on, Terry. Get me. I'm too low there, right? He would get me with the Burn Knuckle. Why doesn't Terry want a Burn Knuckle? Come on, bro. Oosh. I think I fell down there. That's why he got me. That's too high. There, that's the one we want. And then he'll drop just under you, and you'll be able to hit him with a fat combo. Right? Alright, so be practicing that. Also be practicing just drive impacting burn knuckle. Terry's will try to use burn knuckle a lot to get in on you as Dhalsim, because he has a hard time closing the distance to Dhalsim. Alright, let's get Guile out. And here we want to practice instant teleport. So instant air teleport is where you jump and immediately teleport like this, right? Right, now it is very useful because if you do regular teleport, it takes a while to get your next button out, and the next button is not very good. It's this jab that leaves you without much combo option, whereas instant teleport light jumping punch is +9, so you can combo into that, right? That is an enormous amount of damage, 3000 damage, to be threatening at any time, right? So at any time you can do this combo. This is particularly useful if your opponent has gotten used to you doing this kind of float shenanigan and is now waiting around to try to do a big, heavy ground move like this, because this will be too fast for them. Equally, if you find that whenever you're doing this, your opponent presses jab and knocks you out of your air teleport, then you can start doing the old-fashioned float and make sure, and because then their jab will whiff and you'll be able to hit them. So again, with Dhalsim, always be giving your opponent different things to look at, different things to react to. Don't always instant teleport if your opponent's good at jabbing. Sometimes do the high teleport, right? If you're always high teleporting and your opponent's getting good dragon punch reactions against it or something like that, they won't be able to react to this. This is long telegraphing, right? You jump up really slowly and then they're ready for you to teleport. This is much faster. Oops, sorry, but you will get that occasionally, right? So to start with, just practice the combo. So instant teleport, light punch, back medium kick, and then either yoga blast. Oh God. Oh God. Yoga blast. And then you can continue your Oki, which we talked about in the last video, or OD into level 1. And you can also do OD into slide, right? And then you've got Oki there as well. You can hit it with the splash. So make sure you've got that combo down. The other thing that you can do some practice is going in with light kick. Right, and that's the combo there. Right, just our usual Oki setup. The reason why you have to use this occasionally is because if your opponent is crouching, dummy behavior, crouch, then jumping light punch will whiff. You see that? Just whiff, didn't hit anything. All right, and then you'll get damaged, right? Whereas if you do this, it'll hit and you'll be +6. And we can continue the combo. Note that even though Guile is crouching and usually blast whiffs on crouching, back medium punch forces your opponent to stand, right? And so this combo works. Yeah. Let's try it. Okay. And against Guile, this will be very relevant because Guile will often be waiting to do sonic booms, and so he will be crouching. But the main thing is to practice this instant teleport, because this is a very big part of Dhalsim's game plan, and it allows you to cash out a lot of good damage on very many occasions. Now we want to get into a realistic situation. The main things that you use instant air teleport to beat are very high commitment moves, like E Honda's charge up, where he gets the sun shining on him. That takes a long time to do. Lily's wind dance, and in Guile's case, I believe I've got it set here. That's him moving around. This will also be him moving around. That's him moving forward. That's him moving backwards. Blade! Alright, so let's turn that on. So when Guile does a blade, you can get him behind him, right? Because he's committed to the blade. Let's put some walking on, and now we just want to practice reacting to him setting up the blade. Right, now sometimes I even want to practice reacting with that, because Guile will often go straight into his sonic boom charge after this. Oops. Wow, he really loves the blade, doesn't he? Alright, nice. So that's one that we want to practice, is having something to react to. So load up Lily, get Lily moving back and forth like I have Guile, and then occasionally have her do Wind Dance, and when she does Wind Dance, teleport behind her and mess her up. Same with Honda. Yuri's Store, you can also do it against any of these sort of committal moves that lock someone into place. Ryu's Denjin Charge is a very easy one to punish in this way. Yeah, a bunch of moves like that, just practice reacting to them. The other thing that we want to practice with Blade is our main anti-fireball tool. This may be not main anti-fireball tool, but this is a very useful button against fireballs, but especially against Blade, because Blade only has this hitbox in front of Guile, and it actually extends his hitbox at his toes. So it's really easy to hit him. And we just want to practice reacting to the blade. Oops, I wasn't reacting there at all, I was just pressing it. And then also put him on just doing sonic booms occasionally. And react to the boom, right? So practice doing it early enough, because you have to do it pretty early. Right, now once you really represent to a Guile player that you've got this, and once you represent this to like Ryu's and anybody else who's got a fireball that travels mid-screen, people will stop trying to contest your fireballs quite as much, and they'll start to be more aggro. And that's basically when you win, okay? Because they're not as good at being aggro as Dhalsim is at defending. The last thing we want to talk about here, but I think this is more advanced, is sliding under fireballs, particularly when you're close up. Right, so this is a really nice whiff punish tool. And it works on Blade as well. Right? You just got to be quick with it. Oh, you got to be quick with it. Oops. Got myself into trouble there. So generally speaking, I think you want to use this one. But as you get more advanced, probably not a gold tactic, you want to slide in behind it. Oops. Nice. See, that's big damage. 1500 damage. Alright. The main thing is practice your instant teleports, right? Bonk. Okay, so we've covered the float, we've covered instant teleport, particularly using it against setup moves. We've covered crouching heavy punch to go under fireballs. We've talked a little bit about sliding. Now we want to talk a little bit about kick heavy optimization, and for that I'm going to get Marisa out, just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Alright, so far we've only talked about using kick heavy and then setting up a fireball like that. You should usually use a light fireball. And we've talked about it after an uppercut punish where you get the punish counter. But you'll find that there are many situations in the neutral where you throw this out and you get a punish counter. And it's really noticeable when you get a punish counter because there's a scream freeze, right? Now, in these situations, we want to optimize to get a little bit more damage. So the easiest way to do it is just to press heavy punch. And you can just mash heavy punch. And you get a 2-hit combo and you do 2000 damage. That's pretty good. And that's the best thing to do when your opponent's far away from you. But when your opponent's a bit closer to you, you can get better damage. Right, but you've got to be quick with it. Yeah, I've got a 5-hit combo and we got 2400 and we got more corner carry and we took up more space. So with Dhalsim, you're often moving backwards. Don't jump backwards. Actually, I should have said that on the float. There's a great video from F-Champ, Filipino Champ, where he talks about Dhalsim. He says, this is like the dumbest shit. He never wants to see this. In his words, you're supposed to be a wall, not a little bitch. So jump up and float. Don't jump backwards. All right. Jump up and float. Jump up and float. All right. Be a wall, not a little bitch. All right. Don't jump backwards. All right. Okay. I'm glad I remembered that one. Back to kick heavy. All right. So there will be all these situations in the neutral where you get random kick heavies and you want to convert that into something like this, right? Because that gets you 2450. Now, if you want to be really precise about it, then there's 3 ranges that you want to be paying attention to. If they're far away, it's just heavy punch. If they're a medium distance, it's drive rush in, crouching heavy punch, heavy flame. Now, heavy flame will work because you're drive rushing. So this is basically like getting a punish counter with this button, and so it will convert into heavy flame even though it usually doesn't. If they're really close, you want to do this combo. Oops, sorry. I pressed the drive rush too quick there. But they've got to be quite close for this one to work. Or maybe I even have to cancel it. Yeah, let's try it one more time. Yeah, so you've got to actually cancel to do the Yoga Blast. So I think that one's too advanced for gold, so I wouldn't really worry about it. The reason why it's good is because this forces stand, so then you can go into blast consistently. Blast obviously gets you Oki in a way that heavy Yoga Flame does not. This also builds a lot of bar. So I've got maxed out 3 bars down the bottom so you won't see it, but this builds a remarkably large amount of bar. And it also does 1,000 damage by default. So it does 1,200 on punish counter, but it does 1,000, which is quite a lot, whereas this only does 800 by default. So you get a little bit more damage out of this combo, also because you do the blast. And blast does more damage than Yoga Flame. So it is slightly more optimal to do that, but typically speaking, you're going to have to do a drive rush cancel, which costs 3 drive gauge, whereas for this one, you can wait for the heavy kick to recover and you'll still have time to get it out. And I think that's what you want to be working on. So in order to practice this in a slightly realistic scenario, what we're going to do, once you've got the timing down, especially the timing for letting the heavy kick recover before you do heavy flame, go back to standard, block after first hit, shouldn't really matter, and get your recordings going. So we have 2 recordings of Marisa just walking around doing not a lot. And then we have 1 recording of Marisa doing heavy gladius. Now, heavy gladius is the fireball motion and punch. And it's a very committal move, so you can just practice kicking it like that. You can even practice your punish counter punishes like this. Oops. Bonk. She's too far away from my other combo. Oops, that was too slow. Right, now there I pressed the drive rush too quickly. And so it cost me 3 bars when I just want it to cost me 1 bar. And then I didn't press the heavy punch in time. Now I'm too slow. Timing was off again. Nice, there we got it. All right, so just practice that. Once you've got that down, then we want to turn the walking back on. And now you'll see her doing the gladius occasionally. And we just want to practice recognizing that we got a punish counter. Recognizing the range that we are from Marisa when we get that punish counter. So there I'm far, so I got to use my heavy fists. But if she's a bit closer, then I'll do that combo, right? Because that gets me an extra 500 damage for 1 bar, which is a bargain. And it gets me more corner carry, and it builds more bar for me, just generally the one we want to do. Now you see that occasionally she does Superman punch, even though I didn't record any Superman punches. That's because one of the movement recordings ends with her walking forward. So if you walk forward and then press the fireball motion, you get Dragon Punch. But this is actually a good thing to practice because Marisa's Superman punch is very reactable with drive impact. And you want to practice reacting in realistic situations. So I think just keep it that way. but make sure that you don't. Now I've got her blocking after she does Gladius, that's why she crouches, and I think that's also good, because that forces you to be fast with your timing. Remember that in a match, these punish counters are going to come up much more randomly than this. You're not going to be whiff punishing Marisa the way we are here. This is just so that there's a slightly realistic cue for you to practice optimizing these kick heavy punishes after. Oh, I was a bit slow with my DI. It's a bit slow again. Too far. Well, maybe I could have drive rushed there. Definitely there I have to use the fists. Nice, we got it. Alright, so just keep practicing that, and if she flies at you with the Superman punch, try practicing your drive impact punish. Alright, we're nearly done. We've got two small things to talk about. The first one is OD Yoga Comet. So this is something that you should just add to your arsenal as an extra layer of shenanigans and nonsense. All right, there's a couple of things to talk about with OD Yoga Comet. The first one is that OD Yoga Comet, I don't know how to describe this, resets the juggle count or something, but in any case, you can act afterwards. So you can OD Comet and still do another air action. All right, I can still kick there, right? So if I do Yoga Comet and I see Marisa jump over it, then I can still kick her in the air. All right. Equally, I can teleport. Okay, and I can teleport in front of her and then do this one. You can also teleport OD Yoga Comet and still react, right? So you can do 3 air actions if you include the teleport while doing OD Comet. So it's a very confusing and disorienting move for your opponent, and it's a really good thing to do in scramble situations. So sometimes you'll feel yourself getting backed into the corner. Your opponent's doing a pretty good job at negotiating your obstacle course. They're timing their jumps over your fireballs really well, something like that. Now you want to mix it up and come in and hit them with that teleport combo, or you want to do like something like this. You can also do mummy drill, OD Comet, teleport, hit, right? Which is ridiculous. So this is like 4 actions. Okay, mummy drill, OD Comet, teleport, hit him. All right. One thing I want to talk about here that's important is that if the comet's coming in from this side, the player 1 side, and you teleport onto the player 2 side, it can create a very nasty mix-up where your opponent has to change the direction of their block. See that? Because I went to the other side of her, she's now got a block on that side to stop the fireball, right? And it happens pretty quick. You can do this here as well with instant teleport. Right, you need to be pretty far away, right? And that also sets up a really nice, easy, safe way for you to approach, because if they try to jab you out of this teleport, which a lot of the better players will do, they will get hit by your fireball. If they do that, then you can often get a combo off on them. All right, so that's something to also think about with the OD Comet, is switching sides on them, and generally it gives you a way to get in on your opponent, all right, and change the momentum of the match. So I think OD Comet is another one of these things that now in the high gold stages, you should try to integrate that into your game, and you should integrate this fireball based approach as well into your game. All right, last thing we need to talk about is paying attention to your opponent. That's the defensive addition for this round. I think OD Comet is actually a defensive tool because it helps you get out of a lot of situations, because you can kick afterwards, you can kick, teleport, stuff like that, right? It's pretty nasty. But the main defensive advice I have now is that in high gold, players will start to know their way around Dhalsim's offense. Up until this point, you haven't really had to pay much attention to what your opponents are doing because Dhalsim is so active in terms of playing his game plan. Your opponent really has to play Dhalsim's game and beat Dhalsim at that game. But as you get into gold, players will be drive rushing at you, players will be much more effective at jumping at you, players will be using a lot more of the cheap stuff that various characters have, and you'll need to start to have answers to that. So what you want to get into the habit of in high gold with Dhalsim, with other characters you want to do this much earlier, is watching your replays or thinking during the match, how did I lose that match? What sort of stuff was my opponent doing that was beating me? And we've got a few obvious candidates. Let's look at some of the characters. So you want to have a response to Luke's light punch, medium punch, heavy punch target combo, after which he often does flash knuckles and stuff like that, right? You want to have your OD uppercut on lock. Jamie's stuff is a bit more complicated. Yuri, you want to have an answer to dive kick because they'll do it a lot against Dhalsim. Cammy, you want to have an answer to spin knuckle because they'll do it a lot against Dhalsim. Honda, you want to be ready to punish his OD headbutt, and you want to not be jumping back because Honda does a lot of butt slams when you jump backwards. All sorts of stuff like that. Akuma, he's going to have his demon raids, and you want to have answers to demon raid and air fireball, which is actually something that Dhalsim punishes quite well because of back heavy punch, the arms in the air. Right, so these are all sorts of things that you want to be having answers to, and if you see that there's something your opponent does that beats you, you want to get into the lab and practice beating that move. Try to figure out some sort of strategy that helps against it. If you want, go into my Ryu guide and have a look at the Silver 5 and Gold 5 videos where I talk about a lot of the stuff that Ryu can do to beat various aspects of these irritating moves that people have, and some of those tactics from Ryu will translate across to tactics for Dhalsim. Right, let's do a quick summary of what we covered. We covered float, medium hands to keep people away. If they drive rush, we give them the foot. If they jump, we give them the heavy kick. And usually we'll just be floating forward and doing palms. And sometimes we want to float back and forward, never really make it clear what it is that we're doing. Sometimes you even want to throw a comet in there. Sometimes you can throw in an OD comet and go on the offense. Right, so we talked about floating. Then we talked about instant teleport, particularly this combo. And remember that if your opponent starts to adapt to that, you want to go back to this combo occasionally to throw off their timings. And equally, if they're adapting to this, then you want to hit them with the instant teleport. So they've got to do something about that. If they're crouching, you can use the light kick to get them. And one of the best ways to use instant teleport is to throw out a slow fireball and jump in behind it, because that will allow you to approach your opponent safely because the fireball's giving you cover, similar to how we use archers. You can also do this a little bit on the float. If your opponent's giving you space, then you can light drill forward to take up some of that space. All right. So we covered that, float, instant teleport. Then we covered Dhalsim's anti-fireball tech. So one of them is the instant float. That's the first piece of anti-fireball tech. The second piece of anti-fireball tech is crouch heavy punch, which works really well. And then you can also drive rush slide, or if you're in close, just slide in general, which converts into that if you hit him with the tip. Then we talked about kick heavy optimization. If they're far away from you, just follow it up with the heavy punch on punish counter. And if they're a bit closer to you, then follow it up with that combo. Talked about OD comet shenanigans, using it especially when you're under pressure, to reduce some of that pressure, right? And we also talked about using it after mummy drill. Right, it's quite an effective situation. All right, and then finally we said pay attention to what your opponents are doing and develop counter strategies. As you get more advanced with Dhalsim, the whole point of this character is to react to what your opponents are doing. Up to now, you've actually been forcing them to react to you because you've been setting up these obstacle courses. But as you get more advanced with Dhalsim, you're going to be floating a lot, and your opponents are going to be drive rushing and jumping and doing neutral skip moves and all sorts of stuff. And Dhalsim definitely has the tool to beat every single one of those approach options, but you've got to notice what approach option your opponent is using and put out the appropriate technology to beat it. All right, see you in Platinum.